From her 3 years on Charleston City Council so far to free board plus 2, I sit down exclusively with Charleston City Councilwoman Carol Jackson for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Carol Jackson,
yes,
welcome
sir.
back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the chance.
You're very welcome. So it's been what, almost 4 years for you now?
No, I'm halfway through.
Halfway through.
I'm in the beginning of year 3.
Wow. Well, what is the biggest difference between when you started to right now?
I would say that we have, sort of a new dynamic with our newer council members, and the fact that the mayor was reelected seems to have made a big difference in terms of being able to just make, incremental and hopefully rapid progress on a lot of the things that he feels responsible to accomplish in his second term. And I'm enjoying getting to know my new colleagues and helping them, sort of hit the ground running. There's just a lot of things on our plate that we don't really, I think I did feel this sort of poignantly, and I was very glad that my new councilwoman colleague, Marie Del Chapo, said, well, we can do our homework. We don't really have to have our hands held to go backwards and hear all of the background of decision making that has preceded where we are today, because that would be an exhausting, program to have to just bring everybody up to speed in all the details that we've based some of our current ordinances and things on as we're deciding to go forward. So I was very happy to hear that she says, we're grown-ups, we're ready to hit the ground running, but it does feel like there's a lot of change between when I was elected in 2017 in terms of what we knew our biggest priorities, were about to be. We knew that we had the flooding conditions that now we've had 3 more storms since I started running for office I think it was Hurricane Irma storm surge was that fall. And now we've had the other circumstances, as well as the studies that have now informed what we knew sort of intuitively, and now we know more officially from the Dutch dialogues and a lot of the science that has been created by the Charleston Resilience Network.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah.
You talk about flooding. Obviously, I got to take you back to Tuesday night, where obviously City Council was held down the street here.
Right.
And Charleston City Council approved new requirements for new home construction in flood-prone areas called the free board requirement.
Right.
And that ups the requirement from 1 foot above the FEMA standards to 2 feet above the FEMA standards.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, what are the new home construction in the flood-prone areas in your area, in your district?
There's actually no big subdivisions currently going on in my district. My district is comprised of sort of a hybrid of older subdivisions with bigger lot sizes. So we're starting to see some minor subdivisions that are trying to fit into the original configuration of streets and drainage and things like that. I think that will continue to be a trend as property values increase and people want to live closer to where they work. And, if you can avoid driving to Somerville and working in West Ashley, you try to live near West Ashley or downtown. Sure. And James Island is becoming a very popular, lifestyle for families in particular. Sure. I think when we moved there in 2013, it was still sort of an underappreciated set of neighborhoods, and in terms of how affordable it was at that point in time and how close it was to everything. But it's no longer a well-kept secret. It's definitely the property values have probably gone up 50 to 75% in just those 6 or 7 years since we bought our property. So I think on the basis of having that diminishing affordability, people are looking at the lots and deciding that on paper they can be subdivided into smaller building footprints. So that's actually happening in my older neighborhood of Bayfront.
Oh, yeah.
The other subdivisions that were built there under Mayor Riley's annexation, sort of program, they're actually getting a little older. Than a lot of people still think of them as brand new, but most of those subdivisions were created in the 80s and the early 90s. And so we're starting to see, we've got drainage issues there that are better than they are in the really older county neighborhoods where basically they used farm ditches and then they built onto that. So those subdivisions that were done in the 80s and the 90s are a much better plan for drainage. But the streets are starting to wear out, and so I have my share of my list of things that need to be maintained and replaced, and there's not enough money to go around right now in terms of our tax base. So we sort of jockey for position and try to get our voices heard on behalf of our constituents. So that I feel like that's a big part of my job for James Island.
James Island. How much money do you need to repair some of these issues and replace a lot of things?
I came from a place where people were probably more amenable to property taxes because they purchase the things that we all know we need out of local government, right? So I tried to float an idea during the first budget season that I was part of. So that would have been to create the budget of 2018.
Sure.
And they sort of laughed me out of the room. It was like, Carol, we don't raise taxes here. So at that point, it would have been just to give us another $2 million to spend. Mostly, I was in favor of some of the department heads were trying to explain how they needed more staff to keep up with the growth and the responsibilities that we put on them. I know the building industry is, all perpetually frustrated about how long it takes for them to move a project from beginning to end.
Sure.
In the permitting phases of things, because we just literally have a backlog because we don't have enough people to handle the volume that comes into our planning and permitting department every day. So I think that in my way of seeing local government be responsive to those things, I think if taxpayers understand the correlation between what they're paying in taxes compared to what they get out of it, I don't think it would be a hard sell. I do think as more and more people are moving here from outside the region,
Sure.
And they're coming from places where their taxes are higher, but they also know that they get their sidewalks and their bike lanes and their drainage and better traffic controls. I mean, we need stoplights in places where we can't get them. So I'm sort of sitting back and waiting for the taxpayers to say, we know we're just getting what we pay for, which is very little for very little, and now we want to pay a little more so we get a little more, and I think that's coming.
How do you hope the South Carolina Department of Transportation will work with the City of Charleston to get more speed lights and whatnot in your district?
I think that's also an evolving progress plan. I'm on the Transportation and Traffic Committee of the council, and our very smart and strategic transportation director, Keith Benjamin, has been doing a great job of building up, just communication relationships with both the county and the SCDOT. And he's worked in a variety of places, so he knows what is possible when a region, puts its mind to making traffic work better and transit and things like that. So I think that at this point in time, so the last meeting that we had last month, he invited the regional office representatives of SCDOT to our council meeting, and basically they just went through the things that they're in charge of and how they are now learning to meet together. They meet regularly across the the jurisdictions
Right.
of city and county and state,
Right.
which is something that they had never done before. And I think the more that they appreciate the challenges that we have in helping people live in their neighborhoods more safely, especially off the state roads. So a good example of that is the Maybank
Yes.
corridor, and we were very grateful and happy to bring the engineer for the state. He literally walked the whole length of Maybank with us from Valley Road up to the municipal golf course, and saw for himself how dangerous it is as more and more businesses are on both sides of Maybank, and people are taking risks by just running across the road and things. So just this past week, we found out that the final piece of a mid-block crosswalk plan, and you'd be surprised at how much all that stuff costs, but we'll have a pedestrian-controlled light.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to cross, like from the Terrace Theater
Right.
over to the poorhouse,
Right.
where there's no intersection, they'll be able to hit the traffic light. Traffic will stop, and the pedestrians will walk across safely. So we just got the last piece of that funded. It'll probably take a year to put it all together, but I think we have hope. There's another similar situation on St. Andrews Boulevard as it turns into 61 right past Sycamore.
Right.
Those neighbors have been asking for a way to cross safely across that part of Maryville, Ashleyville in particular.
Right.
And we're working with the county and the state to come up with a similar mid-block, safe crossing there. So it's incremental. I do think that the theme of our meeting with the regional director for the state, and also with Secretary Hall, is that they would really help themselves by letting us by studying Charleston as a new model of transportation planning, because we're an urban region, much different than the roads that they plan for all the other rural counties and places that are literally still moving cars and not people. So we need to take care of people, and I think they're starting to appreciate the differences between planning for transportation in a place like this compared to Lexington County or somewhere where people just need to get from A to Z as fast as possible.
Oh yeah, via car.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to Tuesday night, because on Tuesday night, obviously, Councilman Jason Saccharin, who voted against the measure last time, asked for the matter to be recalled and voted upon according to the Folsom Courier.
Right.
It received a 10-3 vote, with Councilman Mike Seekins and Carl Brady and Griffin voting against it.
Yeah.
Why did you all vote for this and not have a requirement for fill and bill?
I think that's a harder call for some members to make.
Okay.
We need to understand the actualities of what that would look like for a single property.
Okay.
We are going to have a very highly regulated way of controlling fill uses with our new stormwater regulations that are going into effect on July 1st.
Okay.
But to be honest, those are more for larger properties that are being subdivided, or anything over a half acre as a single property. So we would need to understand what it would look like for a smaller property that just is going to be elevated to the extent that they would be fitting into another block or something like that. So I think it's a matter of education of the council to help us appreciate, because there are some times when you need fill. As much as I've been trying to champion any control measures that we can take in order to create more protective development that is not going to endanger the properties that it's trying to fit into. That's certainly been something that I've been passionate about ever since I ran for office, or one of the reasons that I ran for office, that I feel like we have to make up for lost time in the way that we're protecting surrounding areas from the last remaining development that we are trying to do in the city. So I think to just insert the no fill sort of, at the last minute in a freeboard ordinance was just more of a stretch than some of the members. It hadn't really been written up for us, so we didn't have any text to actually amend. I would personally, support that. I think if we pay attention to why Mike Seekings voted against the substantial rehab 2-foot freeboard vote that we took at the very end of the meeting, he said the only reason he's voting against it is because it didn't have a prevention against using fill to get to that 2-foot level.
Okay.
So we just need to sit down with our engineers and figure out the text that we can insert into a reprise of that ordinance and then bring it back to council.
And I know that obviously during that particular council meeting, it would also, with this bill, would address the problem from happening because it requires certain grades and soils to use. What's that current grade and soil that the city is using right now?
Well, I mean, it's all based on the actual site, the topography for the actual site where you're trying to get a building permit, right? We've always, ever since FEMA has been mapping areas for different flood zones, the city has joined all the other jurisdictions in establishing that that's the minimal height that a property has to be built on. So basically, it's all based on the topography of where you're building, and the FEMA maps divide up the territory based on the relationship to where you are at from sea level.
Sure.
So, for example, my house is new in the middle of an old neighborhood, and when our builder put the building permit in, we had to get an elevation certificate, and that proved by a surveyor, and that proved that our land, where slab driveways are, were 8 feet above sea level, and the rule for our house to be built elevated needed to be at we were sea level plus 12.
Sure.
And then the city's law at that point was 1 foot above the FEMA elevation. So we had to be 13 foot off of sea level, which meant that if our property was at 8 feet on the ground, then by law, we had to build up another 5 feet. We actually built up another 10 feet because we wanted to have be able to park under the house.
Sure.
So I walk up 16 steps up and down every day.
Good exercise,
It's my only exercise at this point. So yeah, I'm very happy about that. As long as my kids tell me I have to use the hand railing because I'm old and I don't want to fall down the stairs.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So anyway, it's hard to talk about theory. That's why I was making the suggestion at the council meeting that rather than sort of go off in our separate corners about why we don't like this or why we do like this, and we're all talking theoretically, that we should have some really case study examples in front of us so we could say, okay, here's a house like mine, 8 feet, at sea level. It needs to be up 13 feet. And what would that look like for a homeowner expense to actually have to build up to meet those regulations? My thought about where we are from, we already require people to be at FEMA elevation plus 1 foot,
Right.
and I think we kept losing sight of all we were trying to do on Tuesday night was raise it up another foot. We were starting like we're going to be surprising people that have to elevate their house at all, which maybe they will be surprised case by case by case. But as far as the law is concerned, it's already at base elevation plus 1 foot.
Right.
So we were just trying to get it to be another foot because that's what everybody has recommended. Will at least make properties that much safer, when the sea level rises 2 to 3 feet. And we're the only jurisdiction in the whole region that doesn't have a 2-foot rule.
Wow.
So.
And I know obviously Mayor John Tecklenburg talked about the new stormwater manual, which was approved in the last council meeting. When you look at that stormwater manual, what looks good for your district?
All of it. I mean, I think because we do still have some wide open spaces on James Island as you head south toward Folly Beach.
Sure.
And those haven't been built out for logical reasons, that they're more prone to flooding based on the tidal creek configuration as you head toward the Folly River.
Mm.
So anyone that is going to be buying and trying to develop sort of the remaining leftover farmland on James Island will be under those new regulations, which will basically, and again, I think if we had a couple of case studies that we could look at and say, okay, here's a before and after, what a development would look like today compared to what it'll look like under the new regs. My understanding, and I was on this task force that wrote the manual, even though, as a layperson, I was just in awe of what everybody knew. But in terms of understanding the concepts, basically what our new regulations will do will be to spread out density. You won't be able to pack as many houses, onto the same size property as you can currently under the older regulations, because you are going to have to, depending on where the topography is. Yeah. I mean, if it's on high ground, that's where we want more density, honestly. But the places where people would be probably trying to develop typical subdivisions of single-family homes with their driveways, with their, lawns and all of that, you'll see fewer houses being built based on our new regulations, because you have to accommodate for the water that's going to come, and that's what our new regulations, are doing more successfully than they have in the current conditions.
And you talk about obviously the stormwater manual. How does the stormwater procedure look?
The procedure?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, that doesn't really change. I think the way of getting your land permitted for development, we have a zoning code. Well, we have a master plan for land use, and that's basically going to be rewritten for the next 10 years. This year. We're going to start a round of community meetings next month, or May, I guess, is the community meetings. We're going to have some introductory meetings, and then we're going to literally take the planning process out to neighborhoods and all the different boroughs, as Mayor Tecklenburg likes to call them now, and make it a holistic opportunity for people to really weigh in on their priorities for things. So, but when you want to build something, you have to look at the master plan, and for example, on Johns Island, they have inside the urban growth boundary and outside the urban growth boundary. So if you're trying to work on a piece of property that's outside the urban growth boundary, that has a much lower density inherently, according to the master plan that the county and the city have agreed to honor. So you start with the master plan, and then you look at the property, and all land has a zoning category assigned to it. Some developers don't want to, so for example, single family zoning allows by right, without any approvals, without any zoning approvals, you can rightly build 4 houses to an acre in a single family zoning category, as long as you can meet all of the other conditions of having road access and setback from the road and drainage and all of that. Right. But as far as a pure decision about zoning, you can take what current zone is on. We're probably going to change a lot of zoning after we do our master plan, knowing what we know now about the elevation requirements and what the Dutch dialogues, put on paper for us to be smart about. So I think we're going to see changes to zoning density just based on those kinds of common sense and now professional consultations that we're, engaging in, that we don't want to create the opportunities for flooding conditions and congested roads for evacuation and things like that, knowing that we have to be responsible for the climate impacts that aren't going to change. So you take your zoning. If you don't like the zoning, you have the opportunity as a matter of course to ask for a rezoning, but then that's a whole separate process. So just say you're going to like the zoning that you want to build on, then if you want to build multiple houses on one piece of property, you have to go through subdivision approval. That becomes a level of review for, will you be able to access it from roads? Will you be able to drain it successfully? And so that's a staff review that has a checklist to go along with it. And if you get an agreement that you're meeting all of the review criteria on that checklist, then your subdivision request comes to the Planning Commission, and they give you the approval to subdivide into the number of units that you want, townhouse or single family or whatever. Then you take that subdivision approval and you go back into the more detailed technical review process, and that's where the city staff and our advisors, we have to hire third-party engineering firms because we don't have enough staff to review those plans in a timely way. So that's what they call the technical review process, TRC.
Okay.
And that can be very intense and very lengthy if a builder comes in with plans that aren't quite up to speed. They have to go back and revise them, and they get comments for how they need to change things, and then they have to do the changes, and then they have to bring them back and get it reviewed all over. So I've seen technical review, like number 7, that they come back with the same set of plans or with the revisions.
Sure.
And that's frustrating for property owners, but it works to the benefit of the common good of the community. That's why we have those regulations. So then you get what you call a site plan approval.
Okay.
You've got a successful drainage system. You've got a successful way of accessing roads. You've got ADA, you've met all of that, signage. I mean, it's a whole layer of things that you have to get on your approved site plan. And once you have that, then you develop your construction plans, and you literally go to another permit. Through another permit and get your building permits. So for how you're going to wire it, how you're going to plumb it, how you're going to build it with wood or brick or whatever. So that's another iterative process. And by the time you come out with all of that, then you can start building.
Now, that engineering firm, how much will that cost the city?
I don't know what our outside budget. We've been trying to bring people in-house because that's a more efficient use, and we get to people, and we get to sort of train them in the ways that we want to frame our engineering staff. And the good news, bad news is the city pays competitive salaries, but not top dollar.
Okay.
We have great benefits, so anybody who wants a great job with the longevity, as long as you fulfill your performance measurements and have great benefits, I'd love for everybody to come and be hired. But it took us a year and a half to find a qualified, an experienced engineer. So we're bringing people in fresh out of engineering school in order to, start them out in a career, but they can't hit the ground running as an experienced evaluator of plans. So that's when we have to bring in third-party companies to flesh out the experienced part of how to look at a plan and say, yes, it meets all the requirements from the manual. And so I honestly don't know what our budget is for that this year, but we're spending more money on outside engineering than we would like to. We would like to, bring people under our payroll and be able to have a very cohesive set of reviewers. But we like the people that are, as far as I know, we're very happy with people that are coming from the outside too. And we've had to have that supplement for so long that the first couple of people that I saw, I kept seeing them over and over again. I thought they were on our staff. So, it's a reliable set of outside parties that we use. Yeah.
To be continued.
Yes, sir.
Well, Councilman Carol Jackson,
yes.
Thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close House.
Well, thank you very much, Quintin.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime.